We see that you are truly an expert in your right in this field of youth development. So we're happy to have you, and we're glad for what you have done already since you've been here, and we look forward to great things happening under your guidance and your wisdom as we move this youth policy forward, not for us at this head table, but for every young person born and yet unborn in the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis. At this moment, we would like to allow for a few questions, if needs be, or if desired, from persons representing the media houses.
Good morning, all. Carol Philip Tudor of the Democrat newspaper. I have 3 questions. Should I ask them all at once or one at a time?
You can ask all at once.
I can ask them all
Yes,
3 at
please.
once. Several of the speakers, Brandy Williams and also the Honorable Sean Richards, and I think you, Vernon Connor, has also said the same thing, that the policy that was met was, well, it was not quite a policy, it was a working document that had been there 15 years. Is that to say that none of it had been implemented? I suppose it can't be, since it's a working document. But how much of it will you use? Is there anything in it you will find salvageable to continue to use in this new policy that you are launching? That is the first question. The second question is directed to Mrs. Eversley. As she was naming out the 8 basic policies, she used number 7, gender sensitive. Would you say why, in your expert opinion, that a youth policy gender would need to be sensitive? And finally, you also mentioned it has to be fairly budgeted and financed. And since the budget has already passed, is there going to be another form of being of finance for this youth policy, or will it has to wait around until another budget comes in December?
That's the third question. Okay, thank you very much for those questions. I would note that we have with us at the head table the 2 directors of the Departments of Youth for both St. Kitts and Nevis, and they will also share in responding to these questions. I will ask Mr. Pierre Liebert to give a response to the first question with respective to how much has been used of the standing draft for the policy and how much will be retained as will be necessary. Mr. Pierre Liebert.
Good morning, and thank you for the question. It is indeed a very important one. The first question you raised, how much of the existing draft was over the last 15 years used? As far as what relates to the work of the Department of Youth Empowerment, those elements were looked at and used as the guiding principle per se in directing or informing what we did as a department over those years. I can't speak for the other. I can't speak for the other areas, because as the persons at the head table would have suggested, youth development touches on every aspect of civil service and private sector as well. So I'm not in a position to speak for them at this point in time, but I could say that the policy draft has over the years influenced the work of the Department of Youth Empowerment in St. Kitts, and I think a bit in Nevis as well. Yes. Yes. Yes.
You just can't say exactly which things.
Yes, the idea of service, I think that's one of the pillars, volunteerism, and the interventions that are laid out under those within the policy, things like that were looked at, and they informed what we did. The services that we offer were informed by this. In the absence of an overall strategic action plan, you follow. Okay? While we didn't have that overall strategic plan in place for everybody to be engaged, we took, from the Department of Youth Empowerment's perspective, our directions, our influence from the policy itself.
And if I may add as well, you would know that youth work or any particular ministry, service in ministry, is based on principle. And there are certain standard principles that will transcend the ages no matter what, will transcend the societies no matter what. So yes, we have been modeling our work in the youth ministries, youth department, based on certain standard principles which are contained in the policy. We will review those principles as well for their currency and their relevance, to see what is obsolete and what needs to be added in. And in that regard, then we hope we can arrive at a final product which will meet the current needs of the young people here in St. Kitts and Nevis. So basically, we are hoping that this draft document will be a guide towards really achieving a final document. So it's not like we're going to be throwing out everything. Some things are standard and they will remain as well. So it's all right.
If I can simply add to what has been said before, I think that we need to recognize that a youth policy, it doesn't speak to specific programs for the youth department. The youth policy more or less speaks to the rights, the responsibilities, the guiding principles for the youth department, for youth work in St. Kitts and Nevis. As such, the work that you see coming out of the Youth Empowerment Department, yes, to some extent guided by some of these principles, ensuring volunteerism, gender equality, and various other programs which would encompass some of these principles. You must also be reminded that it was a draft policy. It hasn't been laid in Parliament, it hasn't been accepted by Parliament, it hasn't been accepted by the Cabinet. So being a draft, it is not binding between the young people in St. Kitts and Nevis and the government of St. Kitts and Nevis.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Well, that. All right. I'm responding to the question, the excellent question you asked about why policy should be gender sensitive. And that is grounded in several issues, but I want to start with what goes into a youth policy. I mentioned I focus on the 5 domains around which the Commonwealth Youth Development Index is constructed for a particular reason. All youth policies of the Caribbean and in the globe, all youth policies include goals for young people's economic participation, their ability to earn a livelihood, sustain a livelihood, feed themselves, contribute to families, and contribute overall and ultimately to national development. That is the economic participation. So if we just look at the economic participation goal, when we look at the how unemployment data for the Caribbean, what is the first thing that we notice? One, that young people are disproportionately affected there are 2 times more young people who are unemployed than adults. And within that percentage, we also see something that is glaring. And what it is, that young women are their unemployment numbers are even higher. And that is just one example, and a very critical example, to illustrate why we talk about gender sensitivity and gender equality. Because when we are developing policies, we want to see what affirmative actions are necessary to ensure that young women have access that is equal to the access to men. In the Caribbean, we have other dynamics in relation to the participation of young men in education. And so what actions we will need to take, and that's why we say gender sensitive, to ensure that young men have that type of access in terms of educational attainment and so on. So we are looking to see where there are disparities, and the policy addresses those in terms of the objectives and in terms of the strategic actions. And all of this is grounded within the concept of substantive equality that is part of the human rights framework.
Your third question was with regards to budget. Yes. We are aware that the whole policy and the implementation of the youth policy would engage some substantial amount of financing. It is very timely, this process is very timely, because we are right now in the budget preparatory stage. You mentioned something about budget has passed. No, we are presently doing budget for next year. So, beg pardon? For 2017, that's correct. And so this process is very timely, because we can now budget for the implementation. As has been mentioned, the process will take 6 months, so that would take us into next year. So we can now budget the amounts that will be for the implementation of the policy. So we are in a very good time frame. And if we are, and I know we are very concerned about the youth development, and so if we are concerned, as we say we are, then we will be able to allocate the necessary funds to ensure that the policy is done, it is implemented properly, and youth work in the Federation can move.
Will it be a federal funding?
If it will be a federal, it would be a joint funding. Well, federal, because St. Kitts would have its part, Nevis would have its part as well, but it's joint funding.
Thank you.
We can talk to that too.
I think I should also add here that you would have heard that Ms. Eversley is here as part of a partnership between UNESCO and Commonwealth. So that part of her being here is being financed by both organizations. As a matter of fact, UNESCO came on board and actually provided us with some funds to assist us with the consultation process. We've been going out and able to have discussions with the young persons. Miss Eversley doesn't come here free, and so she comes with a salary. There's a cost for room, board, accommodation, etc. And those organizations are sharing those particular costs with the government of St. Kitts and Nevis. I think the point was well made by the minister from Nevis that we're presently in the budgetary process, and so going forward, of course, the relevant youth departments, the respective youth departments in St. Kitts and Nevis would have to budget for these costs. What perhaps hasn't come out quite clearly as yet is that after you have the youth policy being tabled in a parliament, then you have the development of a national strategic plan. The national strategic plan will speak more to the specific programs which will guide the work of the youth empowerment departments in St. Kitts and Nevis.
Thank you very much. Ministers, Minister.
Ian Richards of the St. Kitts and Nevis Information Service. First off, we heard a lot about timelines in terms of the process you're expecting to last approximately 6 months, and Deputy, you broke down the fact that first there is a consultation and the drafting of the policy and it going to cabinet, and then also the implementation of the action plan. But in terms of the timeline, how soon can persons expect that we can see something before it actually goes to the parliament and actually be passed? Because that is a particular concern that young persons have always had, particularly given the length of the process from before. And also, Ms. Eversley, you spoke about the fact that you've been here in St. Kitts and Nevis the first time since the 90s. I know that